Hi there, welcome back to Northlight Photographic Workshops. Today I'm going to take you through the process of making a print from one of the files that I've created recently. And what I'm going to do is kind of give you an idea of how I maybe pre-visualize something, how it's going to be when I reproduce it as a print. There's this thing called your mind's eye, and so you're seeing a photograph when you're there out in reality, and you're seeing an image that you're going to compose, and you're basically putting a frame around something, and you're capturing it. So when you're doing that in your mind, it looks a lot different, especially if you have some experience photographic printing and you have some experience making photographs, and knowing kind of what you can create out of what it is that you've captured. So basically what I'm trying to do is create a mood, or just kind of make the image my own in some way, and it's very rarely does it come straight out of the camera like that. So what I'm doing is I'm showing you some images here. If you look to this, you can see on the screen here that these are some images that I made recently in Iceland with a group that I was with. And as you can see, they were kind of, we saw this group of horses, and we stopped the van like we do very often. People were trying to get some sort of an image of a horse. And, you can kind of see what I went through here. And, right off the bat, I saw this horse there, this kind of like Appaloosa-looking horse, but kind of an Icelandic horse, but still with this Appaloosa sort of coloring. And I thought it was real interesting, and he was really responsive. And so, as the group was kind of photographing these horses, I was kind of, coaxing him over a little bit. And you could tell he was kind of the leader of everything. And so anyway, he ended up coming over. This is some other imagery that I made. He ended up coming over after a little while, and you'll see what happened here. So when he comes over, he starts off, and he's just basically here like that, standing in front of me. And then all of a sudden, he starts to do this gesture where he's kind of, maybe scratching an itch on his nose or something like that. And so, right away, I started thinking, oh my gosh, I've got something here. This is a beautiful image. And so, I framed up and I shot as many images as I could. However, when I was making this image, I could see it kind of as a darker image, and I knew because he was in front of this rock wall that it was going to be, or not rock wall, but this pile of rocks, that it was going to be a little difficult to isolate him, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with this image. I saw the blowing grass, and I saw, this gesture that the horse was going through. So I just fired off some frames right away, knowing that, even though it wasn't that exciting of an image in color or the way that I was capturing it, I knew what I could do with it later on, and I envisioned it as this black and white image with a dark, moody kind of a cast to it, with this gesture that the horse is doing, almost like a bowing gesture, or some sort of an acknowledgement, or whatever kind of a gesture. I really, really liked it. So basically, I fired off a few frames, and then pretty soon the horse just turned around and walked away. So that was kind of it. I went back and I just had these few to work with. So in looking at them, I initially just kind of worked them up in a way, just basically on my phone and in my computer on the trip. And I used a slightly different image at the time, but I ended up coming back, and once I looked through them, I could see how the gestures were and how the horse was, and I just saw this one here that I just really, really liked. This image I really liked a lot, and so I wanted to do something with that image. And so what I'm going to do is take you through the process of what I did to make this into what it became. So I'll reveal that in a little bit. And as a matter of fact, you've probably seen it in the thumbnail if you've looked. But so anyway, basically I wanted to take this into a black and white right away. So what I do here is I work with it just like I would in the darkroom back in the day. So what I've gone over to the develop mode here in Lightroom. I do all of my processing in Lightroom to begin with, and then I take everything over to Photoshop later on. But I brought it over here into Lightroom right away, and I went over to the side here, and I can look at this image. I can see there's some greens in there. There's a little bit of yellows in the horse, in the gray of him, and in the background image of the stones and things. So what I did is I shifted over here to a black and white image, but in doing so, I went down here to the black and white mix, where I go into and I try to accentuate certain colors that were in the original image. Now you can see how the grass kind of turned light in this, and so what I'm going to do is I know that grass was green, so I'm going to pump that up a little bit. And as you can see, you know, I can lighten that up and I can darken that a little bit. And basically I'm just going to bring it down a little bit to bring a little bit more detail in it so that it's not quite so washed out like this. So I was just going to bring that down just a hair like that. And then, you know, my yellow here, I was going to kick up just a bit, not too much, because as you can see what that does also is it sort of darkens the grass in the foreground. So I'm just sort of evening things off like you can see right there. And then that's basically it. I'm not going to do anything more as far as the black and white conversion in this image, because I like the way it is right now, and I'm going to work with it as it is. Now, as you can see over here in the shoulder area, I've got a little bit of a sparky highlight that, you know, I want to bring that down a little bit. I'm going to want to do a slight bit of vignetting, and I'm also going to want to do some actual work on the textures and things in the horse. Now that's one of the things where the new Lightroom really comes into play very handily. What I can do is I go over here to masking, and let's see, I'm just going to do this. There's some changes about it. So what I'm going to do is go over here to masking, and I'm going to go to subject, sky, backgrounds, that kind of thing. So I'm going to choose subject, and what it's going to do is it's going to detect the subject in this image. It's kind of knowing sort of what I was focusing on, and it will detect the horse. And as you can see here, it's pretty much done a wonderful job of detecting my subject in this image. So I'm just going to go with that right now, and with this mask, so now any adjustments I start making to this image are going to be just to the horse itself and not to any of the background imagery. So what I wanted to do with that horse was I was going to bring down the highlights just a little bit in that, because see there what's happening? I can bring them down way too much, but I don't want to do that. I want to keep some contrast there, but I do want to bring down a little bit of detail up into here where you can see on the shoulder that there was kind of almost a clipping. Now you can see over here in my histogram that it's not clipped at all. Now, if I wanted to go here to the highlights and I really wanted to bring them up a little bit more, I could, but I'm going to bring them down like this. And again, I'm just trying to balance this image into a sort of a middle gray at this point. So that's all I'm doing right now to the highlights. Now what I can do is I can go over to the general exposure of that whole horse, and I can pick it up like that. You know, I can almost make it something crazy and magical, or I could color it different things, but I don't really want to do that. Or I could actually darken it up, but I don't want to do that either. I just want to keep the contrast up a little bit. I want to accentuate the texture and the coloring of the horse, and the sort of Appaloosa-like texturing of the horse. So basically, I'm going to adjust that just slightly off the center and just bring it up just a little bit. Now, that's good. Now, I'll hit enter a couple of times to clear that mask. And so now I'm working basically on everything again. Now you can see that the legs here, the legs of the horse are a little bit dark. And I'd like to kind of bring up a little bit of the coloring in there as well. So what I can do is I can go back to my mask. I can choose that mask again. And now what I can do is I can go over here to the brush. Let's see here. So I'm going to take the brush and I'm going to size it down a little bit. And I'm going to bring it over here. And in there, I'm just going to kind of create a haloing sort of a mask around that. Now, this won't be a real sharp mask or anything. I'm going to do a little bit into the tail here. It won't be a really sharp mask or anything like that. It won't be right to the details of the edge of the horse's leg or anything like that. But it will give me some control over these areas that I've given some color to, some masking to. So now what I'm going to do is go back over here to exposure, and you can see what will happen is I'll bring that up, but it just brings it up sort of slightly. It's not going to bring it up extremely. So I can bring that up a little bit. Every little bit helps. I can kick the contrast up in there a little bit. I can lift up the highlights a little bit in there. I can go into the whites and lift them up a little bit in there. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit more texture and a little bit more, it opens up that shadow, that darkness a little bit. Now what I can do with that brush is I can go back afterward, now that I've created the different adjustments to that mask, I can go back and I can kind of paint in just to kind of work on the areas that I wanted to bring up a little bit more, excuse me. There you can see that. Bring a little separation into the legs over here. I'll come into the tail here in this area that was really pretty darkened out, and I'll lighten that up in that area and bring a little bit more texture back. I'm not adding anything that wasn't there before, I'm just kind of creating areas. Now if I was in the darkroom, I'd be burning and dodging these things. So there we go. Now that's pretty good. I like that. Now, I can also go into that mask, excuse me, I can go into that mask and I can adjust the blacks a little bit. I want to bring them down just a little bit. I don't want it to look cloudy in there. I don't want to bring it up too much and add any cloudiness in there. So there, you can see it's pretty cool. So, now what I'm going to do is clear those masks. Now, what I want to do is actually work on the background. Now, how do I do that? I can select the sky, but what I can do is I can go into the actual mask that I was just using. Once again, I'll go into the mask 1, which is the horse itself. Now, as you can see, I've got that one set here. Now, let's go into here and invert mask. Now, what I'm doing now is I'm working on this area that isn't the horse, actually. I've taken an inversion of everything here. So you can see that when I bring down, any controls are controlling everything but the horse mask. So I'm just working on a different area of the imagery, of the image now. So what I'm going to do is bring that down a bit, but in the same time, I want to work on that clarity in the background just a little bit. Because what I'm trying to do now is I'm sort of trying to accentuate that rock pile in the background slightly to be able to sort of mimic the texture in the horse. That was my idea originally. Now, let's see here. I'm going to take a little, dehaze it a little bit. You can see it's darkening things in the background slightly, but I'm not interested in that as much as I am interested in picking up a little bit of the texture back there. So there we go. I'll lower the blacks in. It's nice. I like it. Okay, so I'm going to clear those masks. So now after clearing those masks, I'm going back and I'm working on just the image itself. And what I like to do on these kind of things too is I'm imagining this more focused on the horse itself. So I'm going to add a little bit of vignetting in there. Now, the vignetting is something that I want to do post a crop on this. Now, here's the other thing that I'm thinking about on this image is that sometimes when I'm shooting with the D850 or with the DSLR, I like to, you know, sometimes I like to use the crop of the full sensor, and sometimes I like to crop it more like I would if I was shooting a 4x5 or an 8x10, which would give me more of a 4:3 crop. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try a crop on that. And I'm going to go back up here to the cropping, and I'm going to go to the angle, the aspect ratio here, and I'm going to go down to 4:3. And as you can see, I kind of like that because it brings it to a point where I am focusing again a little bit more on the subject, less on the background, and I just don't really think that added area leaves that much. And I also, for some reason, in certain images, I think that the crop of a 4:3 is a little bit more intimate or a little bit more, I don't know if you will, serious or something. I don't know if that helps at all, but it makes it a little bit more, I don't know if I can explain it any more than just saying it seems, you know, a little bit more calculated, if you will. I don't understand any better than that to explain it to you. But as you can see, I like this crop, and I really like it a lot. So now that I've post-cropped it, I can go in and vignette just the post-cropped image. So I'll do that by coming back over here to the to my different selections in my developing module. I'm looking out the window because there's squirrels running around all over there hitting my bird feeders, and they're getting away with it right now because I'm here with you. So here we go, post-crop vignetting. I can pull that down quite a lot. But I don't want to do it so far. I don't want to be so exaggerated on it. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. Like you can see there. Yeah, I'm enjoying that right there. So I'm going to leave it right at that. Now, there's other things though that I want to do in this foreground down here. I want to bring this foreground down a little bit. You know, as you can see, the grass is kind of lighter down in here. That's okay, but I still want to bring more attention to the horse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here to my masks, and I'm going to create a new mask. And in this mask, it's going to be a linear gradient. And I'm just going to drag it up from the bottom like this. I'm going to be very mild in the adjustments I make here. I'm not going to be, you know, what I call hand of God, you know, where you're just like, oh, really changing the light. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. A little bit more here in the oops, there you go. A little bit more here in the foreground. Just a little bit. I think like that. That works really well. Pump up the contrast of that area. And there we go. Now here's another little secret thing that I'm going to do with you is that I like the way the image is right now. Knowing that I'm going to take this into a different process, I'm going to be printing this as a platinum palladium, and then I'm going to be putting a pigment of gum on it. I'm going to be making it technically a gum over. I know that I'm going to be changing the color a little bit. So what I can do, excuse me, is I can go here while I'm processing in the black and white. I can go down here to my color grading. And as you can see, I've got color grading here where I've got my shadows, I've got my highlights, and I've got my midtones. Now what I like to do is I come over here to my highlights, because I like to get the highlights a little lighter and a little bit more of a yellowish color. So I'm going to bring my highlights up a little bit over here. As you can see, it's bringing up a little bit of that color into the highlights. Right about there is where I like it. Then I'll bring over here, because what I'll very often do is I'll cool the shadow details down with a different layer, or just because of the nature of the platinum and palladium, it'll be a little cooler in there. So you know, to kind of show me what it's going to look like, I'll drop it down in here too. I'll drop the shadow detail down in toward the blue range a little bit, just to cool it down in those areas. There, you can see it looks really nice. So let's see, let's go to full screen and have a look. Yeah, I'm really liking that. Yeah, it's going to look good. So here's another little secret that I'll do with you, is that once I've worked on this quite extensively into Lightroom, I'll take this over into Photoshop, and what I like to do in Photoshop is to do a little bit of healing. Now you can see there's certain little bits of rock and things in there in the foreground, and a lot of these spots and things like that, and a lot of those, you know, although they're naturally there, for me, they bring your attention away from what I'm trying to draw your attention to. And, you know, again, in my mind's eye, I didn't see it with that in there, and I don't really want to have all of them in there. There's certain things like down in here that just sort of draw my eye away from the image. So what I like to do is I like to go through and clone them out. And again, this would be something that I would do in a normal print back in the day working in the darkroom, where I would go afterward with spot tone and I would spot these images out. I would retouch them. So let's go over here and we're going to edit it in Photoshop. And in Photoshop, I am going to, there we go. Now in Photoshop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my healing brush. Not my healing brush. I don't like to use the healing brush. I know a lot of people like to use that, but I just like to use my cloning brush, because that way I can do a little bit more of my own choosing of what gets cloned. So I'm going to size it down, you know, quite quite small. So I'm not going to be making big changes, but what I am, if you can look over here, you can see that I'm going to be cloning out certain just spots. Like this, to me, draws my eye away. So I just want to pull that out of there. It's my prerogative as the artist here, and that's what I'm going to do. So you can see that's gone. Now I'm going to drop another one out of here. Now a lot of these, I'm not being really critical about my retouching here because a lot of these are very minor edits, and they're not going to be seen in the final print after I take this to digital negative. So here I've got a couple other here, and I'm taking them out. And you can see it makes quite a difference, you know. It's not a major change, but it is, because your eye, all of a sudden, it's not there, and your eye focuses more on the subject of your image. Then I don't know where to stop, though, so I'm going over here, and I'm going to pull a few of these out, too. Here's one that's a little bit obtrusive here. Take that one out, take this one out in the background. There you go. Now, let's go back up here to full screen. You can see the image pretty much how I intended to make it. So, oh, I see one more thing up here on the left here. You can see this spot up here. I'm going to take that out because I want to be really good on this. Often there's things that you want to change later, so I'll have to make another negative, but for my purpose here, I kind of know what I like, and I'm taking these things out now. There we go. All right, that's good. So now, as I'm going to be making a digital negative out of it, what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to have to, once again, go back to grayscale on this. And at this point, I'm just going to go up here to mode, grayscale. And there I am. And then what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to invert it, right? Because I need to invert it to a negative. But not only that, I need to flip it horizontally, because as I invert it and I make a print, we're going with my coding with my negative, and so we're going to be going emulsion to emulsion, and therefore you have to horizontally flip your image. So you'll see what I mean here. Now we're going to go image, we're going to go to image rotation, flip canvas horizontal. Now we're going to go to image adjustments and invert. And there we go. There's our negative. So what I always like to do is say file, I'll save it as a different name. I'll save it as a negative name in a folder of my negatives. So the next thing to do is I go over to my print frame, my print tool, and now it's time to make that negative. So then I'll go over here to my recent images, and I'll go to the horse, and there it is. There's my negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to output this negative, and then we're going to take that off into the darkroom, and we're going to make our first print of it. So bear with me when I make the print, and or while I make the negative, and then I'll take you in the darkroom. All right? Now in running the print, I'll go here to quad tone rip where I'm working, and now I've got my correction curve in here, and this is a curve that I've made. You know, you can see in my digital negative series, if you look up here right now, I'll have a link. In my digital negative series, it'll tell you a little bit more about curves and why I build them. But anyway, I'm going to print this negative through this curve, and then we'll go from there. Next stop, the darkroom. Let's go. So now I've got my negative printed out, and it looks really good. But before I get to printing, I like to mask my negatives. You probably seen my images before. I like to have clean edges to them. You don't have to do this, but as part of my process and part of my workflow, I like to mask the negatives. So I'm going to take you through that right now. And what I do is I come over here to the light table and I'll put it down, emulsion down. And with the emulsion down, I have pre-cut strips of Rubylith here. Now you can see Rubylith is a graphic arts film that you can use that blocks out UV light. It's a masking film that's used in different processes, silk screening, that kind of thing. I buy it by the rolls. I've cut up these strips to use. So what I do is I come over here to the light table and I just take the strips and I line them up with the very edge of the border of the negative. Sometimes I'll overlap just a little bit. And then I'll take some of the removable tape that I use. Now this is a Scotch removable tape that I use here, this blue stuff. I like to use this for this purpose. But what I'll do is I'll take and I'll anchor that down on here on part of the film, obviously where I'm not going into the image. And I'll get a couple of them anchored in there. And then I'll go on the top here and I'll do the same thing. I find right at the edge of the image. And anchor that there. Now, this whole process of this I have online. I'll leave a link up here to my Platinum and Palladium playlist. And the masking of the print and of the negative are in there as well. So it gives you a little bit more in-depth explanation of what I'm doing. So then I take the sides and I do the same. And I can anchor this to the other piece of Rubylith film, like so. And then I take and I do the last side. Now, I'll carefully peel that up. And you can see that I've got it on there now pretty nicely. But one thing that's good to do is then flip it over. And because there's been some overlap of the film, I like to take an anchor on the back as well. And that gives me a good firm mask on the sides of the image. All right, one more side here. All right, there we go. Now, as you can see, I've got it quite nicely masked off here. And it's pretty, it's in place, it's anchored really well. Now what I'm gonna do is get a pair of scissors and I'm gonna trim off this little extra edges here. Now right now I am sizing this for a certain print order that's been made. And it's also sized so that it will nicely fit into one of my print frames that I use, as you can see. So now with that ready to go, I'm going to want to now mask a piece of paper. So that'll be next here. So I'm going to set my negative off to the side here like this, and I'm going to choose a piece of paper. Now you can see up here I've got some paper that's been hanging up for all day, and I've been humidifying the room. Now humidity is very important when you're doing platinum and palladium printing. It's really good to have piece of paper that's been brought up to the humidity of the room, and I like to keep the room at least at 45% relative humidity. Now I have a hydrometer on the wall that I'll show you, and I like to keep it anywhere between 45 and say 55, sometimes 60, but 60 is getting a little high. But anyway, the reason that you want to keep your paper nice and hydrated is because therefore when you're laying your emulsion on here, the emulsion doesn't sink so far into the paper, gives you more of a surface layer, and it helps with demax. It helps with a nice contrast in your image, a nice matte black density. So what I'll do here is then now I like to also mask my paper because it helps me keep the edges very clean. I mask the negative and the paper. Therefore, I'm not spilling over a lot of extra palladium on the edges when I'm coating it. So what I like to do that is to bring my negative back over here, and I'll put the negative down on the light table like this, and then I'll put the paper over the surface of the negative. And I'll kind of even it up nicely. And then I take a pencil, and I'll just take and mark each corner. And I'm a little bit liberal with my mark. I mean, it can be a little bit off. What I want to do is when I mask this off, I'll mask it slightly larger than the negative area so that I get an emulsion coating that's just a little bit bigger than where my masked area of my negative is. So now I can turn off my light table, and I'll put the negative off to the side. And then what I like to use is this artist masking tape made by 3M, and it's a removable artist tape. And what I found is even more so than this removable tape by Scotch. This one sometimes will pull up the sizing of the paper after I've masked, and I don't like that because it models obviously the surface of the paper and it destroys it. So this stuff works sometimes if I've already stuck it onto something else and kind of dulled the surface. But this was suggested to me by a viewer on YouTube, and it's great stuff. I haven't torn off a sizing or a surface of paper yet. So I'll try to leave a link below in the video to this stuff. But anyway, now what I'll do is I'll come back over and tear off a piece and go between my markers here. And I look and I find my marks. And I'll just, like I say, I'll put it slightly outside of my mark because I just want to make slightly larger area coated. And I'll stick that on there. And then I'll take off another piece. And when I'm doing this, I also bend over the tip of the tape here so that I have some tape to grab onto when after I've coated and I want to take it off. So here I go to the edge right there, and I stick that one down. And I go around the whole piece of paper this way. Now again, in the link that's up in the video here, or if you just go to my YouTube channel, you'll find my Platinum and Palladium playlist, and in there it has all kinds of different things about mixing palladium and that kind of thing, but it also shows you my masking technique in there and gives you a little bit more detailed explanation of it. So there's my marker. And there's my other corner marker right there. I stick that on, and now I'm on to the last one that I use this tape for. But I'm not done masking off the print. As you can see, there's a lot of steps to doing it the way that I do, but it's just the way that I do it, and it's the way that I do it to get the prints that I get. So there we go. Final one masked there. All right, now, there's still a little bit of paper at the edge, right, that's uncoated and unmasked. And rather than use up a bunch of tape to put that on there, I've pre-cut these strips of other paper. And it's just simple, computer paper. And what I do is I'll take that over and I'll put it right on the edge like this. And I'll use some of my removable tape and I'll put it on there like so. All right, and because the tape, well, actually, I'm gonna put some on the sides here too. There we go. So now we're all masked and we're ready to do our palladium coating. So I'm going to set that to the side here and I'm going to get a brush ready for that and we'll move on to the next step, all right? Okay, so now that I've got everything all masked off and ready to go, it's time to put our palladium coat down. And what I'm going to do is set this up here. I've got my palladium, my ferric oxalate, and a little bit of tween that I like to use. Now, if you want to see more on this, again, look at my playlist on the platinum and palladium. I'm just kind of showing you the way that I go through the printing right now. So I'm going to use a fair amount of solution on here. So I'm figuring I'm going to use like 12 drops on each one of them. Actually, I'm going to go 15 drops on each because I want this photograph to be really nice and coated evenly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same with ferric oxalate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. All right. I'm going to go 3 drops of tween. 1, 2, 3. Actually, I think I went 4, but it won't be a problem. All right. So now I'm going to wet my brush one more time. Shake it out a couple times. Just dab it here. All right. Now I'm going to run my coating here. Try to get as nice and even a coat as I can and stay within my masking borders. That's one of the reasons that I like to mask, because it keeps me within the area that I need to coat. So I'm not spending a lot of time spreading it elsewhere. And with the cost of palladium these days, you really don't want to be doing that. Anyway, you don't want your borders costing you an extra $5. Okay. Make sure I got my corners coated really nicely, and then I just kind of continue to coat with just the weight of the brush. And I can use a little bit extra that's left in here. I like to put that kind of in the corners and the edges that I don't think get coated quite as nicely. There we go. Now, what I like to do is I like to rinse off my brush and my shot glass before I come back, and that way it lets the palladium soak in a little bit and it evens off a bit. So we'll get this rinsed off. Okay. Now, once I've got that done, I also make sure that I don't coat this, get this over the top of my paper, because I don't want to make anything drip into it. Now what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll pick off the mask that I've put on here. Oops. Now I'll go back and I'll peel off. You can see there that I got a really nice clean edge, which is just important to me in my workflow. I like to have it nice and clean. But of course, it's just a personal preference. All right. So, as you can see, got a nice clean edge, and it's time to dry this off a little bit. So what I like to do is I don't really dry it, you know, crispy dry or anything like that. I like to dry it enough that my negative isn't going to stick to it, basically. You know, I like to dry it down to maybe 20, 22%. So I've talked a little bit here, and this is drying out somewhat. I'm going to use my hair dryer here. There. I think I'm, yeah, that's nice. Still got a little bit of moisture content to it, you can tell, but it's dry enough to put my negative on here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take and I'm going to match the negative up with this again, and then we're going to put it into the print frame here. So let me get that. Let's see, where's my negative? Now normally I like to do this on the light table as well. I'm doing it here for the benefit of you being able to see, because I can see my emulsion through there, and I know that I'm covering it with my negative. And then once again I'll take a piece of my removable tape and I will put it on here just to hold it into place, so I know that the negative is going to stay in contact with the emulsion correctly. So now I'm going to bring my print frame over here now, and face down put my negative and paper in there. Put the frame back on here. And now what I'm going to do is take this and put it in my plate burner for 9 minutes, because that's the time that I know in my plate burner that gives me my maximum black. Now, as you'll be able to see when we pull this out of here, there'll be a little bit of a latent image left. And that is because we left the paper a little bit more moist. So you can see that there's an image there already. Now what we're going to do is take it over to the potassium oxalate, which is what I use as a developer, and we're going to develop this out. So let's take it over there. So here we go. Now what we're going to do is pour potassium oxalate on this, and it will develop pretty much immediately, as you can see. Oh yeah, look at that. Beautiful. Yeah, quite nice. Now, what I'm going to do is leave it in the developer a little bit. Even though it develops immediately, sometimes it's best to leave it in here for a little while, because of the acidic process, and the acidity of the potassium oxalate helps to leach out any unused palladium and helps to clear it. And then what I'm going to do from there is move it down into a successive clearing baths. And there you can see the finished print. Yeah, I like it a lot. Now what we're going to be doing is clearing that and washing it through, and then I'm going to end up washing that print. I'm going to end up drying that print, and then we're going to end up putting a gelatin sizing on that print before we go ahead and do the gum bichromate layer on it. So patience with me here, we're moving on. It takes some time to make a really nice, beautiful fine print, and that's what I'm trying to do here. So stick with me, all right? Okay, so now I've gone through all of the clearing baths and the washing of the print, and I've hung it up to dry, and it's been drying for a while. So now it's time to move on to the next step, and that is to size the paper, to resize the paper. Now, when I'm going on for the gum overcoat, I'm using ammonium dichromate in there, and ammonium dichromate and the pigment together along with gum arabic. Now that can stain the paper and stain the print. So as not to stain the paper, I'm going to give it a sealing coat of a gelatin sizing. Now the gelatin sizing you can find out more about in my playlist on the gum over platinum, if you just look it up in my playlists, or you just look at the link up here right now. But I go into much more in detail about that and about mixing up sizing and that kind of thing. So what I'm going to need here is a little bit of paper towel as a backing. I'm going to need a coating rod, which is basically a straight rod that helps me coat the paper. And then I've got my sizing. And I'm going to pour a little bit of it into a small beaker here, enough to cover the print. And then I'm going to take a little bit of formaldehyde here, and I'm going to do about 2 drops. 1, 2. Now the formaldehyde helps to harden the gelatin, and you can use some things that are a thing that's less caustic called a glyoxide, but I don't like to use that because it colors it a little bit. And you're using such a tiny amount of formaldehyde. So once I've got that pretty well mixed up, I come over here to the print, and I am going to pour out enough to coat the print on one end there, and then I'm just going to lightly drag this across the print. And what I'm going to do is look for the shiny coating, so I know that I've coated the whole paper. I like to coat the whole paper, but it's most important if you just coat the print itself. And then I'll just drag it off to the end like that. And there we go. The print's ready to dry. Now what I have to do is take this and put it on a drying rack, and then in about 15-20 minutes, once this is dry, I can start on my gum layer. All right? Stick with me. So here we are in the next step of the process. As you can see, the print is now dry. The sizing has been dried. And I've taken the liberty to mask it off once again. I've taken it once again and I've masked off right up to the image, and then I've put these kind of extended masks on here so that I don't spill any of the dichromate or the pigment out over it. So what I'm going to do now is take some pigment that I've mixed up already. Now this is it's a French ochre that I'm using here that I like to use for some of my highlights. And what I'm going to do is make a new coating over this print with a gum arabic, a mixture of gum arabic and ammonium dichromate, which is a 30% solution that I'm using, and the pigment, which is mixed in here. So what I've done is I've taken some watercolor pigment, it's mixed in here along with the gum arabic. I'm going to take that and put it into a small little mixing container I have, which is an old film container. And what I do is I mix 50%, my gum arabic mixed with my pigment, along with the 50% solution, or a 30% solution of the dichromate. So as you can see here, I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to squish out a little bit in there, as you can see, and now I'm going to add an equal amount of the 30% dichromate solution. There you go. Then I put the lid on this tightly and I mix it up. And then what I'm going to do is I've got a piece of acrylic here. And this piece of acrylic is what I'm going to use to pour out the mixture now. And then I'm going to use these rollers. And I use those rollers to pick it up and to put it into the print. So let's do that now. Put the lid back on tightly. And now I'm going to roll over here and I'm going to pick up this pigment on here. Now you can see it looks pretty yellow-orange, and that's because of the dichromate. And then I'm going to roll it out onto the print. And what I want to do is cover the print completely. I'll do a little bit of both ways, rolling it on there so that I make sure to get it all the way to my borders. And then very often what I'll do, if the pigment is going down unevenly, is I'll take another one, and just at the weight of that roller, clean roller, I'll just go across it like that, just to kind of even off any bubbles or anything that might be in there. So then now what I'm going to do is go and take off the mask that I put on there. And being careful all the time not to really touch anything. If you want to use gloves when you're doing this, please do, because what it does is it's just safer to use that way. The dichromate is a little more caustic. So then I'm going to peel off my mask, which comes off much easier this time because of the sizing that I've put on the paper to help seal the paper. And there, as you can see, we've got a nice even coating. The borders are real clean, and now I'm going to have to put this off to the side again to dry. So I'm going to put it over here on my rack, And then I'll come back to you in a few minutes when that's dry. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the original negative and we're going to register that negative over the print. And we're going to put it back into the contact printer. And then we are going to put it back on the plate burner and develop that out. So stick with me, we're almost there. So now we've got the dried print. So I've got my ammonium dichromate, my pigment coating on here. It's dried, it's ready to go. So what I need to do now is take my original negative and put it on here. Now, the reason that we're doing this and going through all of this problem with an originally already nice platinum print is to add some accent to it and some coloring to it. A little bit of tonality, if you will, like you used to do with silver gelatin prints. So what I'm doing is adding a very thin muted layer of color into the print. And rather than just overlaying that print with a certain color, I'm actually using the original negative to burn that color into certain areas. So you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. What I need to do now, though, is take the original negative and I'm going to put it on here, as you can see, and I just register it with the original. Now I could use registration pins. If I was doing much bigger prints, I might use registration pins to begin with, but I'm not going to need that for this smaller print. Sometimes it's actually good if you have it a little bit out of register, just to give it a little bit more of a 3D quality in the final print. But I'm going to register this up pretty close. And then I've got it on there like that. I'm going to take a piece of removable tape and I'm once again going to put it on here just to keep it in registration while I put it into my print frame. So I'll bring the print frame over here, set it up, put it in there face down. Take the strainer, put on the back, and there we go. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it into the plate burner and I'm going to give it a little bit of UV light, probably the same exposure as I did originally, which was 9 minutes. All right, stick with me. So there, we're all set up for 9 minutes. Stick with me here, and then what we're going to do is pull it out of there and we're going to develop this print. Now, unlike before where we were developing the print in a potassium oxalate, this one we're just going to be developing it in plain water, sort of lukewarm room temperature water. And what that does is it will leach out the unhardened, if you will, pigment and gum arabic, and it will wash it out of the print. And where the light struck it, it will harden that and it will stay a little bit more. And you'll see in a second what I mean by that. So 9 minutes, we're on to the developing. Okay, so now we've made our exposure, and as you can see, there's really no change to the print like there was when we did the original Palladium print. There's no latent image there. What I need to do now is develop it in water, and I've got some lukewarm water here, and I'm going to take the print face down. I'm going to curl it and drop it into the paper, into the water. I'm just going to let it rock here for a little bit, and what I'm trying to do is make sure that there's no bubbles underneath, because bubbles can help or can hinder the development and cause some modeling. So I don't want that to happen. And right now what's happening mostly in the first bath is the dichromate is coming out of the print. And when I flip it over here, you're going to be able to see that a lot of that yellow is gone. So let me try it now and see what we've got. Oh yeah, look at that. So what I'm going to do here is switch this off to another tray here of clear water. And I'm going to switch these off here. There we go. Now you can really see the accent in it. Now it's looking really nice. As you can see, a lot of that real bright yellow is gone, and now there's just the nice tone in the print. It's looking really beautiful. I'll rinse it out here a little bit more.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a little bit of a final rinse. And I'm going to go hang it up to dry. And when the print's dry, I'll come back and talk to you and I'll show you the print and we'll wrap this up. All right. Well, there you have it. It's been a long day of printing, but we made a print, and it's a beautiful print. And that's the thing about things these days, is that we hold most of these things on our phone, you know. I mean, it's nice to have something that we hold in our hand and that we can share and give to someone. It's tactile, and we can sign our name in the back of it, and it can live beyond us. And anyway, I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. It's really fun making these, and I'm going to keep doing these kind of videos as well, so I hope you'll stay tuned. If you like this one, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that little bell, and maybe tell a friend if you haven't already about this channel, and more the merrier. So thanks a lot. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.